The story of the Anthill Kids cult is one of the most horrifying and unsettling chapters in modern history. Led by a charismatic yet deeply disturbed figure named Roch Thériault. This group's journey from a seemingly innocuous commune to a nightmare of abuse and control offers a stark reminder of how power and manipulation can wreak havoc on vulnerable individuals. Today, we are going to dive into all of it. So please take care of yourself because this one it's really disturbing. So please sit back, try to relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hi everyone, welcome back or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin and I am fascinated by all things cults, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I post 2 videos a week on one of these topics, so if you are into this sort of thing, please consider subscribing. I would absolutely love to have you here. Now, like I said in this intro, this video is going to be really disturbing. If you are here mostly for psychological cult stuff and not certain gruesome details about murdering and torture, this might not be the video for you. Just want to give you a trigger warning there. So just totally fine if you need to click off of this one. So in order to really understand this group, we have to talk about this leader. So Roch Thériault was actually born on May 16th, 1947 in Saguenay, Quebec, Canada. His early life was steeped in hardships and religious extremism, and I'm starting to think that every person that's been involved in an extreme household growing up ends up being a cult leader because that's been the last 4 cult leaders we've covered. But anyways, he was actually raised in a devoutly Catholic household where his parents were members of the White Berets, a radical Catholic sect known for its ultra-conservative beliefs and rigid enforcement of religious practices. The Thériault family's home was a place of strict discipline, where physical punishment was frequently used to enforce obedience. And from a young age, Roch was subjected to beatings and severe physical punishments, which fostered a profound fear of authority and simmering resentment towards those in power. Thériault's parents instilled in him this strong sense of religious duty, but their harsh methods also alienated him from the faith that they sought to impart. Now, as a child, Roch exhibited signs of exceptional intelligence, particularly in his ability to read and memorize religious texts. Sure, it's going to come in handy for him later. However, his academic promise was overshadowed by his very rebellious nature. I'm sure it's no surprise that he started feeling stifled by the oppressive atmosphere at his home, and then he ended up dropping out of school in just the 7th grade. And this signaled the beginning of his journey away from conventional society. Now, despite his lack of formal education, Thériault was an avid reader and autodidact. He became particularly fascinated with theology, alternative medicine, and self-improvement ideologies. His interest in these topics was not purely academic. Thériault sought ways to assert control over his own life, and eventually he would try to insert control over the lives of others. He began to develop a very warped interpretation of religious doctrines, and so he decided to combine elements of Catholicism, Adventism, and of course his own apocalyptic visions. Now, as a young adult, Thériault's life took a very dark turn. He ended up married and started a family, which sounds great, right? But his inability to hold down steady employment and this growing obsession with religion caused a lot of strain in his personal life. He was increasingly drawn to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, where he found a community that seemed to share his apocalyptic worldview, which honestly sounds just like a terrible way to live. Now, for whatever reason, the church's emphasis on the end times resonated very deeply with him, who saw himself actually as a prophet destined to lead others to salvation. However, his extreme interpretations of the scripture and authoritarian tendencies would eventually lead to conflicts with the church leadership, and this would result in his expulsion from the church. Now, Thériault's expulsion was a massive turning point in his life. Rather than seeing this as a rejection of his ideas or, self-reflecting and maybe recognizing that the problem might be him, he viewed it as confirmation of his own divine mission. So he decided that he was not the problem, they were the problem. And so he decided to gather a small group of followers who seemed to admire this charisma and shared his disillusionment with mainstream religion. Now, these individuals were often vulnerable, and they were seeking spiritual guidance or struggling with some kind of personal crises. Thériault's ability to identify and exploit those weaknesses made him a very compelling figure, and he was able to quickly gain their trust. And what set him apart from other self-proclaimed prophets was his ability to blend his charm with his coercion tactics. He would be warm and empathetic, offering comfort and direction to those who felt lost, but at the same time, he was capable of instilling so much fear into people, and he used his knowledge or memorization of scripture and apocalyptic prophecies to then manipulate those vulnerabilities in his followers. Now, this duality allowed him to establish a very emotional hold over his group, and it made it really difficult for them to question his authority at all. So why would he want to create the Anthill Kids cult? Well, motivations for creating this new religion were very complex. Now, on one level, he genuinely believed in his divine mission to prepare humanity for the end times, which I'm so sorry, but at this point, these things happen around similar times. And did you not hear about the other groups that all thought the same thing? Like, were you just not aware that there were people all over the world who claimed to be the only one who could prepare humanity for end times? It just it's such an interesting psychological study on people who think that. But his actions also revealed a really deep-seated need for power and control. And this likely stemmed from his own experiences of powerlessness as a child. So by positioning himself as a messianic figure, Thériault could assert dominance over his followers and fulfill his desire for validation and, of course, authority. I mean, his troubled upbringing and rejection of traditional authority really shaped him into the man who would go on to lead one of the most infamous and disturbing cults in history. He was intelligent, had charisma, and he was able to manipulate others. And this enabled him to create a community where he wielded absolute power with devastating consequences for his followers. So this little group that he had created would become known as the Anthill Kids, and it started as a commune in Sainte Marie, Quebec. Now, the name Anthill Kids symbolized Thériault's belief that his followers should work tirelessly and cooperatively like ants to build a community that would survive the end of the world. Yeah, he literally said, everyone, we gotta be like the ants. I don't know I would pick maybe like a majestic animal. Not that anything's wrong with ants. They do work hard, but maybe pick something a little more exciting, but that's just me. Now, Thériault's vision was centered on creating a utopian society free from the corruption and moral decay of modern life. The metaphor of the ant colony also appealed to his desire to enforce hierarchy and control with himself at the apex, the queen or king, I suppose, of the ants, directing the tireless labor of his followers. And as the group grew, Roch decided to relocate to a remote area where they could live in isolation and carry out his vision without any interference. So he chose Burnt River, Ontario, for its seclusion and dense wilderness. So this provided both the privacy he desired and the natural resources needed for a fully self-sustaining community. The rugged terrain reinforced the group's isolation, making it nearly impossible for outsiders to stumble upon them or for followers to escape. It also allowed Roch to cultivate a sense of martyrdom and exclusivity, convincing his followers that their hardships were necessary sacrifices for their divine mission. So every time we talk about cults, people always want to know, how did people get involved in this anthill cult? Well, the thing was, Roch Thériault, his charm and charisma was just undeniable. He presented himself as a savior, claiming he'd been chosen by God to guide humanity through an impending apocalypse. And this claim kind of resonated with many of his followers who had been disillusioned with conventional religion, but still believed in that apocalyptic messaging. They may also have been struggling with personal crises or needed some kind of sense of belonging. They were vulnerable in some way. And Roch's ability to provide comfort and direction made him an almost irresistible figure at the time. He also used a multi-step approach to recruit new members and ensure their commitment to his cult. So first, he would target those vulnerable individuals. He was able to acutely identify people in distress, and he would seek out people who were experiencing some kind of emotional instability because those individuals were more likely to be receptive to his promises of hope and salvation. He also offered solutions to deep-seated and deeply rooted problems. He would have these really personal conversations with these followers and present himself as someone who could heal those emotional wounds or provide purpose in that person's life. He emphasized that joining his group would bring spiritual fulfillment, stability, and protection from the chaotic outside world. He also created this aura of divinity. His self-proclamation was that he was a prophet, and this was central to his recruitment strategy. He presented himself as having this unique connection to God, which made his teachings and promises seem totally irrefutable. He claimed to possess divine insight into the future, including the incoming apocalypse, and assured his followers that he alone could lead them to safety. He was also not just charismatic, but very empathetic, at least at first. He had this warmth, this empathy about him, and it made his potential followers or his recruits feel really understood and valued. He would listen to their struggles and provide these tailored solutions and assurances that joining the group was their path to salvation, to happiness, to joy. It would solve their problems. His charm and support disarmed doubts and built trust. He also painted a very idyllic picture or vision of a communal lifestyle where everyone worked together in harmony. So he depicted the anthill kids as a family bound by love and mutual respect. And this promise was particularly appealing to individuals who felt isolated or rejected by society. But once someone joined, he would encourage them to totally cut ties with their family members and friends, claiming that these relationships were distractions or spiritually harmful. He fostered this sense of exclusivity too, convincing members that their group was their true family and they should be honored to be there. He also introduced some rituals and communal activities that fostered this sense of unity and dependence. Now, these rituals were framed as acts of devotion or preparation for the end times, and this would further solidify his role as their spiritual leader. And of course, you can't have a cult without the cult leader instilling fear of the outside world. So Thériault warned his followers about the dangers of the outside world, portraying it as corrupt and doomed. He claimed that leaving the group would result in eternal damnation or certain death during the apocalypse. And this created a psychological barrier within his followers that made them feel like they couldn't even leave even if they wanted to. And of course, Thériault was a master manipulator. He would use fear, guilt, and flattery to control his followers. He convinced them that their loyalty was a test of their actual faith, and that any doubts or resistance were signs of spiritual weakness. And just like so many cults, it all seems to be okay at the beginning. But as time went on, he would gradually escalate his demands. It began with small requests, such as giving up possessions or performing minor tasks for the group. But over time, these demands escalated into more extreme acts of devotion, ensuring a deeper level of commitment. And through this calculated process, Thériault created a very tight-knit, insular community where his authority was absolute. His combination of charm, manipulation, and fear made it nearly impossible for members to see the reality of their situation or even consider leaving until it was too late. So, what exactly did this group believe in? So, the Anthill Kids' belief system was that classic blend of Christian theology, apocalyptic prophecy, and Thériault's own delusions, because he declared himself as a messianic figure, claiming he had this direct line to God. He prophesied that the world would end in 1979 and that the group's remote commune would be the only place of salvation. Then, when his prediction failed, he justified it by claiming that, you know what, God granted humanity more time due to his intercession. So thanks to him building this ant farm in the middle of nowhere, God was like, I'll give all the other ones some more time. You guys get an extension on the apocalypse. So what did daily life look like within the cult? Now, this cult had a rigidly structured schedule, and this was designed to reinforce Thériault's control over his followers. Members were expected to wake up early and devote their days to back-breaking labor with often little food or rest. This included constructing buildings, farming, chopping wood, and gathering resources in the harsh Canadian wilderness. He framed the work as both practical and spiritual, a means of purifying their souls and preparing for the end times. It's sounding dangerously similar to Synanon, and if you want me to break that one down, I know last year people were talking about it a lot, I would be more than happy to do that. So Thériault imposed some very strict rules that governed every aspect of life. Followers were required to relinquish all personal possessions. Members would have to surrender their money, their belongings, and even their own personal autonomy to Thériault. They also, of course, had to cut ties with outsiders because communication with friends or family was strictly forbidden because that person might try to, save their family member from a cult. He also imposed strict dietary restrictions. He dictated what and when members would eat and would often withhold food as a form of punishment or spiritual purification. They also had to participate in daily rituals and prayers. These were all, of course, led by Thériault, and this would reinforce them every day, consciously and unconsciously, that he is their spiritual leader. He is their guide. The members also endured really terrible punishments for any disobedience. And this was, of course, any perceived disobedience or doubt in Thériault's authority. And these punishments would range from physical beatings to humiliating tasks. And what might be the most disturbing is that Thériault also performed these crude medical procedures because he claimed that he had divine powers to heal ailments. These surgeries often involved horrifying methods, such as removing teeth, amputating limbs, or making incisions without anesthesia. His followers were conditioned to view him as this all-knowing, all-healing figure, and they endured these procedures as tests of faith. Now, experts like Stephen Hassan, author of The Bite Model of Authoritarian Control, have analyzed the Anthill Kids cult as a textbook example of destructive influence. So we've talked about this so many times. If you've been at my channel for a while, this might be exhausting, but the BITE model stands for behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. And of course, all of these were meticulously exploited by Thériault. He controlled the behavior through strict labor and rules and restricted their access to any outside information. He manipulated their thoughts with fear-based teachings and instilled this emotional dependency by alternating very drastically between charm and empathy and terror. But also, cult expert Rick Allen Ross has noted that the Anthill Kids exemplify how isolation and dependency are key tools in cult dynamics. By moving the group to a remote area and severing the members' ties with the outside world, Thériault created an echo chamber where his word was absolute. This isolation allowed him to escalate his abuse totally unchecked because followers had no one or nowhere to go to turn to for help. So what does a day look like within the cult? Well, you would wake up at sunrise with communal prayers led by Thériault, who framed these sessions as a means of connecting with God. Now, these gatherings would often include really long sermons where he reinforced his prophetic role and issued warning after warning about the apocalypse. Now, after that, followers were required to undertake physically demanding labor. So some of these tasks would include clearing land, farming, building shelters, chopping firewood. And this was all carried out with primitive tools in very harsh conditions. I'm pretty sure they made their own tools. They weren't running down to Walmart to grab a shovel and an axe. They were building these tools themselves. Food was also very scarce and, like I said before, withheld as punishment. He controlled who ate and when, and used hunger as a method to further weaken his followers physically and mentally. And meals were often inadequate if the followers got one. They consisted of really simple ingredients, and this would leave the members malnourished and then even more reliant on him for survival, because he became the person that was helping them get their most basic needs met. And sleep was similarly restricted. Members were routinely woken up in the middle of the night for these impromptu sermons or prayers or even punishments. And of course, followers were expected to renounce all their personal possessions because that would distract them from their spiritual growth. Within this commune, Thériault also employed numerous psychological tactics to try to manipulate his followers, maintain control, and almost turn them against each other, and even question their own instincts. Members were encouraged to spy on one another and report any perceived disobedience or doubt. This fostered an atmosphere of paranoia, and it prevented alliances that could challenge his authority. He would also alternate between that charm and terror. So one moment he'd be kind, and then all of a sudden he would flip into an extreme act of violence. So followers were constantly not just seeking his approval, but walking on eggshells. This unpredictability kept them in an emotional state of feeling hyper-dependent and trying to constantly make sure that they follow all the rules because they're so afraid of making the leader mad. Followers were also subjected to humiliating and painful rituals that were framed as acts of penance or purification. This included self-flagellation, standing in freezing temperatures for hours, and also public confessions of imagined sins. It's just so heartbreaking to think about these people who just want spiritual growth and community, and they're basically getting humiliated every single day of their life. And of course, he was a master gaslighter. He would often blame followers for their own suffering, claiming that if he punished them, those punishments were divinely mandated. So this obviously made members internalize their abuse as deserved from God, and this further eroded their sense of self. Their instincts were totally shut off. They were totally powerless. One of the most chilling examples of Thériault's sadistic punishments involved followers being tied up and left outside in freezing temperatures or burned with hot irons. He justified these actions, of course, and said they were necessary corrections to ensure spiritual growth. And despite the oppressive conditions, many followers believed his claims that their suffering would be rewarded in the afterlife. And this belief, combined with their physical isolation and mental conditioning and abuse, trapped them in an inescapable cycle of fear and devotion. The ultimate downfall of the Anthill Kids cult was a combination of internal dissent, escalating violence, and intervention by law enforcement. By the late 1980s, Thériault's behavior had become increasingly erratic and sadistic. One of the most horrifying events involved Solange Boillard, a loyal follower who complained of a severe stomach pain. Thériault, claiming that he had this divine ability to heal, performed a fatal surgery on her without the use of anesthesia. He sliced open her abdomen and removed parts of her intestines with his bare hands. He also had other followers sew her back up. I can't even imagine the amount of physical pain she must have endured. That is torturous. He is disemboweling a woman. Oh, I can't even. I gave you all a trigger warning at the beginning, and it's just like hitting me really hard. It just would be so painful. And you probably guessed it, but she would later die in agony. But, of course, it wasn't Thériault's fault. He instead framed her death as a test of her faith. So then her body was further mutilated after her death as some part of a weird delusional ritual that included an attempt to resurrect her through some bizarre means. But his punishment somehow grew even more brutal, and his medical procedures just became outright acts of torture. Well, finally, there was a turning point when one of his followers, Gabrielle Laval, managed to escape from the commune and report these atrocities to the authorities. Gabrielle was one of the most prominent survivors of the Anthill Kids, and her story provides a chilling glimpse into the horrors of life within the cult. She initially joined the group seeking purpose and spiritual fulfillment, but soon became one of Roch Thériault's primary targets for abuse. Over the years, she endured unspeakable suffering at his hands, including brutal punishments, psychological torture, and grotesque medical procedures. Thériault often used Laval as an example to other members, subjecting her to these punishments publicly to reinforce his authority. One of the most horrifying incidents involved Thériault amputating several of her fingers with a pair of pliers as an act that he framed as a sacrifice for the greater good. And despite the excruciating pain and trauma, Laval remained loyal to the group for years, as she, like so many others, had been conditioned to believe that her suffering was necessary if she wanted to achieve spiritual growth and redemption. Thériault's psychological grip over Laval and others was reinforced. And so often people wonder, well, why wouldn't they just leave? They have free will. Why don't these people just leave? But this leader, like many other leaders before him, had convinced his followers that leaving the group would lead to eternal damnation or death in the apocalyptic world that he so often described. But luckily, Laval's breaking point came after she witnessed the horrifying death of Solange Boillard, the one who was basically disemboweled by Thériault. In 1989, she seized an opportunity to flee. Her escape was fraught with peril, as the commune's remote location and Thériault's authoritarian control made leaving nearly impossible. But she fought her way through dense forests and relied on sheer determination to get away. She finally reached safety and contacted law enforcement. And her detailed testimony about the abuse, mutilations, and murders within the commune became a cornerstone of the investigation that would lead to the group's downfall. Her courage not only brought an end to Thériault's reign of terror, but also shed light on the psychological and physical toll cults can have on their members. Her story stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of speaking out against oppression, no matter how insurmountable it may seem. And like with many survivors, recounting the abuses she faced was really challenging. She had to share testimony that detailed years of abuse, including those forced amputations, severe beatings, and psychological torture. She herself had endured horrific mutilations at Thériault's hands, including the removal of her fingers and also a crude surgical procedure on her breast. Her account provided crucial evidence of the group's crimes and this would prompt a police investigation. And when law enforcement raided the commune in 1989, they found a scene of unimaginable horror. The physical and psychological state of the remaining members, coupled with the remains of those who had died, confirmed the extent of Thériault's atrocities. Survivors were malnourished, disoriented, and deeply traumatized. The raid exposed the depths of Thériault's cruelty and the extreme lengths to which he had gone to maintain his control. And luckily, he was arrested and charged with multiple counts of assault and murder. During his trial, the gruesome details of life within the Anthill Kids were revealed to the public, shocking the nation and drawing international media attention. The bizarre and horrifying nature of the case, a self-proclaimed prophet performing amputations and claiming divine authority, made a very sensational story that captivated people worldwide. The media coverage exposed the psychological manipulation and abuse that he had used to maintain control over his followers. It also highlighted the vulnerabilities of cult members and the extreme measures leaders will take to try to consolidate their power. Luckily, he was ultimately convicted of murder in 1993 and sentenced to life in prison. Now, while incarcerated, of course, he showed no sign of remorse for his actions and maintained that his deeds were divinely inspired. But in 2011, he was killed by a fellow inmate, bringing an end to his dark, dark legacy. The survivors of the Anthill Kids have since shared their stories, offering insight to the psychological and emotional toll of life under Thériault's rule. Their accounts serve as a stark reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of support for those who have endured trauma. The survivors of Anthill Kids have shared harrowing details about their experience, and this provides us with a deeper understanding of the group's horrors. And the woman who brought an end to the cult, Gabrielle Laval, wrote a book called Alliance of the Screaming Souls, and it described the inescapable cycle of fear and devotion. Reflecting on her years in the cult, she stated, quote, "We were taught that pain was cleansing, that suffering was a divine trial. But it wasn't until I escaped that I understood it was all a lie, a way for him to dominate us." Her account has been instrumental in understanding the depth of psychological manipulation and hopefully will teach us all a bit more about what it looks like to get sucked into a cult. Another former follower, Roch Thériault, described the fear that governed daily life in the commune. He said, quote, "It wasn't just the physical punishments that scared us. It was the idea that we would be abandoned or damned if we disobeyed him. He made us believe the world outside was even worse than what we endured." And another survivor, Shantel Lab, spoke in interviews about the isolation and control exerted by Thériault. She noted, "There was no escape. He controlled everything, what we ate, when we slept, what we thought. Even our pain belonged to him," unquote. Her words reveal the cult's all-encompassing domination of its members. And the survivors' willingness to share their stories has not only provided crucial insights into the Anthill Kids, but has also offered a really powerful narrative of resilience and recovery. Their testimonies have helped raise awareness about the warning signs of cult manipulation and the importance of supporting survivors in their healing journeys. Roch Thériault's descent into violence and tyranny demonstrates how charisma and control can lead to unimaginable suffering, especially when wielded without accountability. For the survivors, their journeys to healing and reclaiming their lives represent extraordinary acts of resilience and bravery. It's stories like this that make me want to talk about cults even more and keep doing what I'm doing. And hopefully you as an audience member or a curious person or just somebody that feels driven to help others, to try to understand how someone can get so manipulated is so important. Because recognizing the early signs of coercion and manipulation, whether in personal relationships, organizations, or communities, it's so valuable to learn the warning signs. It's a call to support those who have been victimized and to create systems that prevent such abuses from taking root ever again. This dark chapter in history is really important because we need to use so much vigilance in identifying the warning signs of coercion and cult dynamics. And by understanding how people like Roch Thériault operate, society can better protect individuals from falling victim to similar manipulative systems. And hearing the survivors' brave stories illuminate the need for even more awareness and compassion and resources. And hopefully through watching content like this and understanding more, you'll be able to help those around you if you see them in a dangerous group with a dangerous person. I mean, that really drives me to keep learning, even though certain aspects of this particular story were so hard to visualize and think about. Nothing changes if we don't actually talk about these things that happen. It's easy to turn a blind eye to things like this, but the more aware we can become, the more change we can create. So I really want to know what you guys thought about this video. Go ahead and leave a little ant emoji down if you got this far in the video. It's still such a weird name of a cult to me. Like I get the idea of it, but it also feels so existential to me. Like saying that we're a very, very special elite group of people, but we're going to operate like ants, which there are so many million that like to humans, I just feel like ants seem so insignificant. Like it's so easy to stomp on an anthill. So for this leader to be like, we're chosen by God to be like ants, it just seems like such a strange analogy, or comparison, I suppose. But that's just me in my opinion. But I'm really curious what y'all think. Share any stories if you've seen any of the documentaries on this cult. If you have any other information, please share it down below. I always love hearing from you guys. Even if I'm not able to comment responses to you guys, I really appreciate reading all the things that you have to share. When you guys share more information with me and feedback with me, it helps me to learn more and it only makes me a better creator. So thank you always for your constructive criticism and your opinions. I love that we're open to politely share each other's opinions here and get into healthy debates that are respectful. So I just appreciate you guys so much. And don't worry, I will be back very soon with another video for you. So until then, stay safe, ask questions, and always stay skeptical. I'll see y'all soon. Bye.